Hey, good afternoon or good evening. My name's Ivey. I'm the Seed Marketing Director for WinField United. Previous to what I'm doing now for the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time in the field in your neighboring state there in Illinois, mostly central and southern. Couple of different capacities. Most recently, before I joined the marketing team, I worked in our technical products group. Right, so I worked on selecting products for our cropland brand lineup, specifically for Illinois, and managed that lineup over across the state. So I grew up in Western Kentucky. That's where my dad farms at. I currently live in Minnesota. So the Great Divide, right? What I want to talk to you about today is really around managing the acre. Right? And as Todd and Johnny asked me to come and talk to you guys and speak to you good folks today, the one thing that they said, we want to talk about managing the acre, but we really want to specifically hit on how we use data and insights and hybrid characteristics to get after that management piece. All right, so I think one of the challenges, and my dad tells me this all the time, you know, and he makes sure that I understand where he's at. He tells me farming's hard enough, right? We spend a lot of time buying potential, right? We purchase potential, and we spend all of our time trying to nourish that potential to get an outcome that we feel like is what we should get, right? And that's what we do every day, and it's hard work. And I think the one thing that we want to make sure that we talk about, and what WinField United and Superior Ag do, is try to do data and testing to put you in a position to make a predictable outcome-based decision. Right? Because at the end of the day, that's all we can do. Right? Is take what we know and what we've learned, either by experience on farm or through data and research, whether that be university or companies like WinField United. Take that data and insight and make the best decision forward, and let some of the chips fall where they may. Right? At the end of the day, Mother Nature, she always wins out. She's pretty good at doing that. All right, so as we think about predictable outcomes, I liken it to this. All right, imagine if you were with me. We were driving in a convertible here, going through Jasper, cruising down the road, and out in front of us pulled out a straight truck, and that straight truck had porta-johns on it. All right, and we do what we always did. We tucked in right behind it, and we were tailgating. We followed that through town there, and we were going underneath the overpass. And we realized before we got to the overpass that there probably wasn't enough clearance between those porta-johns and the bridge, right? But we did what we always do, and we stayed tucked in tight. What do you think happened to us? Right? I've told every group this, and I make sure that there's no young kids in here, but we got pooped on, right? That, my friends, is a predictable outcome. At the end of the day, our experience is what we've known, what we've learned, told us what was going to happen before we did it. But we went ahead on, right? We made the decision anyways. Right? We're gonna change the tune on predictable outcomes. We're gonna focus on three things today, right? I got 16 minutes left. We're gonna focus on three things. One being seed density choice, right? That's largely a controllable, something that we can do and manage around, right? Population on the acre, seed density. Number two, fertility management as it relates to nitrogen and the impact on nitrogen by germplasm. And lastly, we're going to hit briefly on plant health, right? And what's that mean to keep plants alive longer, right? So that's the three things that we want to focus on. And I'm going to bring this full circle back around to some data and insights that we invest in very heavily on your behalf, right? In the answer plot system to provide valuable response scores to give you that predictable insight decision. All right, so firstly, seed density. What's the first thing that happens the minute we decide in 2020 to increase our seeding rate on the acre? What did we do artificially? Just by saying, yep, we're going to plant more seeds next year, we're going for a different yield goal. Well, you probably spent more money, one, right? Cost of production went up. So we put incremental stress on that acre, right? Whether we like to or not, the minute we put more plants and we create neighbors for these corn plants behind us, inter-plant-to-plant competition creates stress, right? They want to be out by themselves, right? They want to collect all the sunlight they can. They want to collect the nutrients and water that they can, right? And they want to put on 3, 4, 5 years, right? That's the natural progression of a corn plant, to make as many viable seeds as it can until it dies or senesces. We try to confine that and put it in a row and create plant-to-plant competition, right? And get one singular best year, right? That's our goal. We do know, and I think everybody knows, that all germplasm is not created equal on how it relates to population. Right, we all agree with that? We got stuff that's more what the industry calls flex type products. We got more that's more determinate or semi-determinate, right? What's all that mean? From a flex perspective, we've all seen it, right? You take a product that largely you haven't known, you increase seed density on the acre in the subsequent year, right? Happen to be a flex product and you got more of this effect, right? To whereas we spent more money on this acre, right, and we didn't drive a profitable outcome. Right, I think about situation number 2. These are both new products, and I would say both of these new products that I picked, none of you have had them on the farm yet. You haven't had the chance to experience them yet, right? And they both behave differently. This thing, and I pulled them both out of the same situation, a 30,000 plants per row acre and a 36,000 plants per row acre, harvestable ears, and it created virtually the same ear, right? In both girth and length. Right, seed set and seed size, kernel rows is all consistent. Right, and like I mentioned, all genetics are not created equal as it relates to population. We know from working with products, and we know with working with backgrounds, which males and females like it and don't like it. That's hard for you guys to ascertain as quick as we turn around products, right? You no longer get to experience things for 5 or 6 years. You begin to figure them out locally on your own operation, and then you've got the decisions that you need to make, right? You count on people to help you understand these things quicker, right? Because the life cycle of a product today, and believe me, I lived it, an introductory year, right? Test it as fast and broadly as we can. Second year is grow as much as we can, right? If it performs in year 1 and year 3, start to tail it off, right? If something makes it year 4 and year 5, it's a consistent performer. Right, so really you get to understand things for 2 years before somebody's knocking on your door to do something different. Is that fair? And it's hard to get repeatable results year over year on farm because Mother Nature changes, right? We see a lot of things happen to corn plants when we start increasing or decreasing seed density. 1, roots change, right? Roots absolutely change when we start putting neighbors beside it. Depends on genetics. Also, plant architecture changes. Now these things are getting pretty rough to see, right? But that same row configuration that I saw, right? 30,000 plants per acre and 36, automatically, and you can see it out here, if you pick out one of these stakes, right here, you see a plant expression to population, right? 2 rows are at 30,000, 2 rows are at higher density. And we change leaf architecture the minute we add neighbors. And that leaf architecture has either positive or detrimental effects on what that ear is going to look like. Right? Because really the goals of those leaves, especially in the top sides, collect sunlight, go through the photosynthetic process, create photosynthates, and drive them to the ear late season. Right? That's what we do. But our population decision largely affects how successful we're going to be on that. Right? And I want to drive you back to this point. Utilize the data that's going to come out of here in 2 months. Right? We test 240 products every year, right? Across the brands that you see, plus some key competitive brands in the industry, right? Pioneers in our test, because hey, we know 30% of the market share is going to plant Pioneer. Why don't we help those producers that are also experiencing our products make a better decision, right? So we invest in that. And we're going to give you the insights on how each one of those genetic types behave if you would decide to increase or decrease population. One other thing, all right, I spent the last couple of days thinking about this meeting, doing a little bit of looking in on NCGA yields, right? And there's some good data out in the industry on everybody that's participated in NCGA contests for the last 3 years. Right? And basically they got graphed harvestable ear population, right? Ear count and yield that was experienced by that harvestable ear count, right? And they've got that graphed on a pretty unique chart that you can see the actual average, most optimal seeding rate for the acre for that yield environment, right? It's pretty cool. If we think about 185 bushel corn, I don't know if that's anybody's targeted goal in here, what would we think the optimal population, the maximized population for 185 bushel corn is? Any guesses? 30,000 plants per acre, right? A lot of folks in here, the first 3 times have always went over that, right? Trying to grow 185 bushel corn, it's always been 32 or 33,000. It's been the first guess that anybody's ever thrown out. Hey, what about 250 bushel corn? What was the optimal harvestable ear population to grow 250 bushel corn. 34,000, right? And that trend's occurred all day today, right? People went right to 36. What about plus 320 bushel corn? 36,000, right? And I think what I want to leave you with is I'm not telling you that you're overplanting corn, right? What I'll tell you, germplasm has changed in the last 3 years, right? We went through a 5-year cycle of where corn hybrids, the daddies on those products that largely determine the ear style, were more determinant in what they were putting out for hybrid crosses, right? If you think back 8 years ago now, a lot of the stuff was more fixed ear. We were talking about pushing populations, right? That was the message because that was the material we were working with. There's some new males in the industry today, right, that are pretty broad in reach that are allowing us to optimize plant populations and still hit yields that are targeted, right? Using RTP as a tool in that can allow you to hone that in. Secondly, we're going to talk about fertility, right, especially as it relates to nitrogen. Just like plant population, we got the same data scoring analysis on hybrid response to applied nitrogen that we do as population, right? Pretty key insight. Anybody, as you look at these roots, anybody see an issue with these roots? Take a deep look. Shallow, right? One of them. Pretty shallow rooted. Anybody see a concentration of roots right in the V trench? Yeah, it happened. I mean, just like in a lot of cases, we planted this plot what we thought was adequate, right? It was ready to go. Turned out to be a little heavy. We didn't have a heck of a lot of days to work with, right? As you guys well know. So we slammed it in. We created windows of compaction. We created a V trench with sidewall compaction, and our roots largely stayed shallow. What happened after planting occurred, right? It continued to rain. If you would go with me for a minute, how long would you think it takes a clay loam soil that's saturated on top? How long would you think it takes that water to move from soil surface to 60 inches at depth in that soil profile? How long? Just 2 days. Right? In 48 hours, we can move from saturation at the surface to 60 inch of depth. On sand, if anybody's planting on sand in here or sandy loam soils, half of that. Right? We can move from saturation to 60 inch depth in 24 hours. That's how fast water will flow. What else will water take with it if it moves? Nutrients, right? Especially converted forms of nitrogen. Late planting window this year, moisture and temperature. Soil temperatures were increasing, they were saturated. Delayed planting, no plants out there to take up the stuff that was converted. We moved nitrogen deep, right? Anybody experiencing that or seeing that in plant tissue analysis or just overall firing and look at the crop? So it didn't take me long after I landed last night and then this morning to see some of that happening in the field, right? It's just naturally. We kept roots shallow, we moved nitrogen deep, but there are differences, right? Every field that you see and you go across doesn't look the same. Right? There is a unique ability for some genetic types to respond in challenging nitrogen availability environments. And that's one thing that we always drive back to. When we look at our research through the answer plots, we take a hard look at every one of those 240 products that I talked about, and we put them in a nitrogen stressed environment, right? 90 pounds applied, that's it. Enough nitrogen to grow a respectable crop, but enough to induce stress, right? Because that's what we want to see, nitrogen stress. Then on the flip side, in that same replicated design, we feed an unlimited amount of nitrogen, right, to try to create the best response that we can. Then we measure those two applications against each other, right, to try to formulate a genetic response to that application window. Now, if we went across the room, everybody would have a different nitrogen management plan, right? Whether we're loading it up front or split shotting it or putting it late, I tell everybody this, they're all right. Right? Every nitrogen plant is right. Depends on the year. Right? If you go 2 blocks over to where we did some of this for visuals, the best looking stuff from a nitrogen plant perspective was 100% applied at V12. Right? This year. It doesn't show any visual stresses. Plant's green, got a growth effect out of it, right? but you never know, right? So what I'm telling you is you've got to make sure that you're reading the signs of your plant. This right here early, we could have identified this extremely early out here, right? We would have known that we were going to have shallow rooted crop. We knew we had the sidewall compaction. We could go out here with a spade and realize it's harder than that asphalt, right? And that we weren't going to grow roots down, right? And we knew our nitrogen moved. We should have been out applying nitrogen over the top, right? We should, regardless of what our plan was up front, we should have been looking at our genetic style and putting applied nitrogen over the top of this and reading the signs of the plant, right? And using data to know which products we should go to, right? If you had 7 different hybrids on your farm, 3 of them had a high response in their profile and 3 of them had a low, we should have immediately went to try to help the products that are going to need it late, right? Because like I might have mentioned earlier, all 4 of these start running together. It's the strongest source to sink relationship you'll ever see, right? On corn, it's a beautiful animal, right? Because the minute that ear starts to define itself, it's going to do everything it can to feed its purpose, right? And that's why we see if we have root restriction, it's going to pull it from where? Stalks, right? Leaves. We're going to start taking away from those source relationships and putting it right into the ear, all right? Because here's the fact: we take up 40 to 60% of our nitrogen by flowering time, right? 40 to 60% is uptaken through the roots, through mass flow, a little bit of photosynthetic activity by flowering. We still, in a lot of cases, have 50% of our nitrogen left to go after flowering, where we're really getting no new roots to put into that ear, to feed that ear. Right, we're largely going to get that from 2 ways. Through the roots, some uptake if we have soil moisture and availability there. And we're going to get it through photosynthetic activity, right? Creating sugars to put into the ear, right? We're going to take it from the plant, we're going to create some more, we're going to take some up through the roots. But 50% of what it's going to take to grow the bushels that you're after are going to have to come after flowering. All right, so moving this thing later is a key opportunity for us. You look at Tony Vine's data from Purdue, you know, and we've got some stuff that would match. It verifies that new hybrids are taking up nitrogen later in their life cycle, right? The nitrogen uptake curve is shifting more towards the greenfield time period, right? Largely driven by breeders making combinations of products that behave that way, right? So we got to take that into account as we begin planting, right? We typically get tougher environments. We have for the last few anyways. We get root restriction. We got to have a nitrogen plan to feed a crop that's more determinate on taking it up late. And then lastly, when we get to that point, it's about the stay green effect. And then I know talking to Tom and talking to Todd and a lot of the other guys in the other groups, there's a lot of folks in this area that spray fungicide pretty religiously, right? Every acre because you think it pays, right? And I'm not here to tell you that's the wrong plan, right? The one thing that I would tell you is that if there's any piece of data that we put out every year that's valuable through our investment, it's the response to fungicide data, right? How that particular hybrid's going to behave to an application or not an application. Because if you're like my dad, that fungicide is largely his last dollar spent, right? And you know what he typically tells me? I'm not going to spend it, right? And he would plant 2 of the highest response to fungicide products that the industry ever created. For the last 2 years, he's had an opportunity to spray and create yield and create a return, and he hasn't pulled the trigger. And the reasons why is we haven't had the disease, right? He's doing what we've all been conditioned to do. Plant the crop, get the crop to the stage to where we check for disease presence. And if it's not there, right, largely like this is, he chooses not to spend the money, right? And that's okay. But if he would go out and see this, maybe he would, right? And I would tell you that is seeing disease and spraying and controlling disease is a critical part of using fungicide, right? That was the creation. What we have learned in the last 5 years is that the stay green effect of fungicide might be as important as controlling disease, right? And keeping stuff alive longer is extremely beneficial, right? And whether you look at Iowa State research or Purdue research or Illinois research, they would all show you a similar story. every day we extend stay green, or the stay green effect, and keep that plant alive longer, we create 1% more yield opportunity every day. All right, we keep it alive for 5 more days before senescence really occurs and we get to physiological maturity, we create more yield. Right, and that's because of that source to sink relationship that I mentioned, and the ability to know that as nitrogen curve is moved later, when we can create more photosynthetic activity, we can put more sugars into the ear to make, hey, that last component of yield come to life, and that's really kernel size and weight, right? And that's how we do it, right? So bringing this thing full circle, it's those 3 things, right? It's things that we control, predictable outcomes. It's about seeding rate or seeding density, making sure we're understanding our root dynamics and how that product's going to respond to incremental nitrogen opportunity, and then keeping this stay green effect lasting, right? That's how we increase yields without spending incremental dollars, right? And that's really the goal of optimizing production, right, with the resources that we currently have, right? So with that, we're out of time. I'll take any questions. Like I said, I'm between you guys and a steak sandwich, which I had one for lunch. It's pretty good. I just don't think I'm gonna have another one. So, any questions, I'll take them. If not,
Any questions for Adam?
appreciate your time. Appreciate your attentiveness.